On a late evening flight from New York to San Francisco, Lucas Hayes, a 35-year-old millionaire, strode confidently through the plane aisle, exuding the kind of self-assurance that only wealth and influence can foster. Lucas had earned his fortune through real estate, climbing to the top with a reputation as a relentless and shrewd businessman. However, his success had clouded his empathy, leading him to feel entitled and dismissive toward those he deemed beneath him, particularly the elderly, whom he viewed as burdensome and out of touch. As Lucas approached his seat, he saw an elderly woman occupying the aisle seat in his row. She had short gray hair and wore a modest, neatly pressed dress. Her warm smile and gentle demeanor made it clear she was harmless and a bit lost in her own world, carefully arranging her small, tidy belongings. Lucas didn't bother to introduce himself, or even offer a courteous greeting. Instead, he cleared his throat loudly, casting an impatient glare her way. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "This is my seat." Startled by his abrupt tone, the elderly woman looked up with gentle, apologetic eyes and said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, young man. I have arthritis, and the aisle seat helps me stretch my legs." Rolling his eyes, Lucas muttered under his breath, "If you wanted extra comfort, you could have just booked first class." Without waiting for a reply, he flagged down a flight attendant and demanded a seat change, but the attendant politely explained that the flight was full. Frustrated, Lucas spent the rest of the journey casting irritated glances at the woman beside him, utterly unaware that this encounter would soon return to haunt him in ways he couldn't imagine. The next morning, Lucas walked into his company's headquarters, a sleek, modern high-rise in downtown San Francisco, for an important meeting. Today was pivotal. He was set to meet with Victor Thorne, the CEO of one of the largest investment firms on the West Coast. A partnership with Thorne's firm could catapult Lucas's business into unprecedented growth, and he'd meticulously prepared to impress. As he waited in the executive office suite, mentally rehearsing his pitch, the door opened, and Lucas looked up, prepared to greet Mr. Thorne. But it wasn't Victor Thorne who walked in. Instead, it was the elderly woman from the plane, now dressed in an elegant suit that radiated authority and grace. Lucas's jaw dropped as he stared, speechless, at the woman he dismissed so rudely just hours before. She carried herself with calm confidence, showing no sign of recognition. Then, just behind her, Victor Thorne entered, smiling broadly. "Lucas," Thorne began warmly, "I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, my mother and the majority shareholder of our firm. She's decided to take a more active role in our operations." Lucas's face paled as Eleanor turned to him, extending her hand with a poised smile. "It's a pleasure to see you again, Mr. Hayes," she said evenly, her eyes holding his with a steady, penetrating gaze. Lucas managed a barely audible, "Nice to meet you," as he took her hand, his heart racing. The reality of the situation was dawning on him with crushing clarity. The woman he'd openly insulted and dismissed on the flight was not only powerful, but someone whose influence could determine the future of his business. Victor led Lucas through his carefully prepared presentation, but Lucas struggled to focus, feeling Eleanor's silent, dignified presence beside him, a reminder of his arrogance and thoughtlessness. When the presentation ended, Victor excused himself, leaving Lucas alone with Eleanor. She regarded him thoughtfully, her gaze calm but piercing. "Mr. Hayes," she began softly, "I'd like to ask you something. How do you view others?" Caught off guard, Lucas stammered, "I'm not sure what you mean." Her voice remained gentle but firm, carrying the weight of someone who had seen much of life's hardships. "When you meet people who can't offer you anything in return, do you treat them with respect, or only those who can further your ambitions?" Lucas swallowed hard, feeling the sting of her words. Memories of his countless dismissive interactions surfaced, moments where he'd belittled or ignored those he deemed unimportant. Finally, he mumbled, "I suppose I could be more considerate." Eleanor's steady gaze never wavered. "Consideration is the foundation for trust," she said simply. "In business, as in life, integrity matters. The respect you show, especially when it appears unnecessary, is the true measure of character. Her words struck Lucas to his core, slicing through the layers of arrogance he'd built around himself. Without another word, Eleanor rose, nodded briefly, and left the room. Lucas sat in stunned silence, her words echoing in his mind, resonating with a truth he could no longer ignore. That night, Lucas lay awake, the weight of Eleanor's message pressing down on him. He reflected on the way he'd treated people throughout his career. The assistants, waiters, junior staff, and strangers he had ignored or belittled simply because they didn't occupy the high rungs of his world. For the first time, he saw himself as others might, a man blinded by privilege and entitlement. The next morning, Lucas took immediate steps to make amends, starting with his own company. In a meeting with his team, he urged them to prioritize respect, empathy, and kindness, no matter a person's position or background. He introduced new initiatives to support community charities and pledged substantial donations to programs that aided the elderly and underprivileged. Lucas's change wasn't instant. It was a gradual but genuine transformation. With each small gesture of kindness, he found a growing sense of peace and purpose that his wealth alone had never brought him. A week later, Lucas was summoned back to Thorne's office for a follow-up meeting. As he entered the conference room, he noticed both Victor and Eleanor were there, watching him closely. Lucas took a deep breath, prepared for whatever outcome awaited him. "Lucas," Victor began, glancing at his mother, "we've noticed the changes you've implemented. Eleanor and I are impressed with the strides you've made, and it's clear you're striving to create a more respectful company culture." Eleanor gave him a small nod, a hint of approval in her gaze. Lucas felt a surge of gratitude and relief. He had learned that respect and integrity were not only foundations for business, but for a meaningful life. And as he left the meeting that day, Lucas knew he'd gained something far more valuable than any business deal. He'd gained a new perspective, one grounded in humility and a genuine desire to connect with others. The lesson had been humbling, but for the first time, Lucas felt truly wealthy in the ways that mattered most.